Hi, this is Tom, and this week I'm drawing Kirdan for Wandering Hunter. Kirdan is a young high elf scribe, skilled, or at least becoming skilled in abjuration spells, which are, casting like protective barriers, and he's a highly defensive sort of character. As we go on, I'll go into more details about his character, his personality, what sort of gear he has, and why. Until then, and throughout the whole video, we'll just be going over process and everything that comes to it. Still getting used to this format. My first video was a 3-hour long trimmed down version of the drawing process and talking process. I talked while I worked. This time I'm trying out doing a narration after the fact. So I hope that works out. It might end up being kind of convenient. So anyway, we'll get into it. Starting off, I always contact the winner of the lottery and ask for as much character information that they can possibly give me. Things like any sort of write-up about their history, their personality, their character sheets, like stats, their equipment, what sort of important pieces of clothing or color schemes or hairdos or scars or tattoos or basically anything that the character absolutely requires. As far as personality and character and history, I'll definitely be making videos about how that stuff affects personality or the appearance of a character in more particular detail. But in this case, in every case, it's the personality and the history and the desires and as much of the person of the character that you can know. The better the design is going to be. It's going to be more accurate, it's going to be more relatable, it's going to be more interesting, because every single character is different, because every single character is made by a different person. So if you can find a way to just describe who that character is visually as accurately as you can to the source material, you're going to wind up with a fresh face. So starting off here, I'm a little bit behind, still getting used to this. I always try to find out, after doing as much of the reading and research and note-taking and early preliminary studies, once I feel like I've got a pretty good idea of the character's personality, I like to start off with their pose. Really kind of just quick and sloppy, and just trying to get like the posture right, the way that they carry their body, the way they might, in this case, for Kirdan's case, since he's he's a young scholar and scribe, so he's a little bit nervous, he's a little bit shy, so he's got his body language closed in, shoulders not too upright or broad, he's touching his shield, which he wears for, in the notes sent by Wandering Hunter, he's explained that he feels nice and warm and cozy behind his breastplate that he wears, which we'll get to, but also the shield is very functional, where as magic casters such as Kirdan, it's sort of an anomalous thing. Right here I'm working on the eye socket. The high elves in D&D, they've typically been depicted with very high cheekbones, very upward slanting eyes and ears, almost like they got picked up by their ears when they were a kid and left to dry that way. It's sort of a look that I've never quite liked, but I think that it's more important that I try to keep that sort of look recognizable. And I think that when people make these characters in whatever like realm or intellectual property or universe, they're going to be coming with certain expectations, and even though I'll be imagining this character and developing them in ways that are quite different than how they might have done so themselves, there are certain expectations like that I should try to be reticent to. So you'll notice in my illustrations, I like to start off with anatomy. Once I get the pose figured out, I'll do a quick rundown of a rough skeleton. I'm just trying to figure out where all the muscles and lumps and everything's going to line up. I find it really helps with just proportion, anatomy, and making sure all the lumps and bumps are all in the right place. In this case, since he's a high elf, I didn't try to flare out the ribcage too much, trying to keep things slight. A little bit still like humanish. I mean, they're very humanoid, and so it's not going to stray too much further. Normally, I try to keep that sort of stuff for creatures, but I'm actually, over the past year or so, I've just gotten really into the handle of it, or into the hang of doing it, and I even just find it just really fun and relaxing, and it also you can lose quite a lot of anatomy from your brain. If you get too used to things, get too comfortable to things, it's going to be really easy to forget where all the little details and nuances go. And so most of my sketchbook pages are just filled with anatomy studies for the most part, and then like warping it and playing it with like different like anatomies for creatures and stuff. But by doing this, I believe and I hope that it's going to just help keep things fresh for me. It's going to keep forcing me to check my reference and looking at stuff and keeping everything as high fidelity as I can, because one of the benefits is that the more you study anatomy and the more you get used to where all the muscles connect and where the bones, how the bones are shaped and all that stuff, even if you go ahead and start doing life drawing or whatever, even just like doodles from your imagination, that knowledge that you have built in is just going to inform everything that you're going to be drawing. So even if you're just drawing things on a superficial level, like the skin and the hair and whatever, you'll already just in the background be thinking about where things are going to be lining up, and it's just good practice. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of it. Notice one thing in this video that didn't happen in the other is long periods of lingering on single frames. This seems to be just a little bad habit that Photoshop has picked up lately. Basically, if I hit undo more than twice really rapidly, it freezes, so that's basically what's happening there. It happens a few times, but it gets better throughout the rest of the video. I kind of started working around it. So now that I've got the muscular system more or less figured out, and so the eyes sort of how I like it, just started inking. I don't really have a set process. I don't have a set pipeline. I've actually just dabbled with one today. I'm just been taking notes, trying to think of a new plan of attack, something that's consistent that should give me reliable results and steady things. But each time I do a character, I do deviate quite a little bit from each time that I've done it. I do keep certain things in common, things that like one habit that I've really gotten into is using clipping masks and layers and having one color per layer, all stacked underneath a curves layer. I'm going to be getting into that stuff for future videos, some more of my tutorial-based videos, explaining, getting more in depth in particular into the what and where and the why of that stuff. But by and large this time I'm trying out to do a bit more of a detailed, contained sort of line art drawing, and then just sort of painting over it. I've been getting back into acrylics, and a big part of some of the approaches I've been taking has been starting off with the pencil sketch, and I'm figuring that might be sort of a nice way to go about trying out some digital stuff. So we'll see. I'm definitely going to be settling down on things later, but I mean, I've been using Photoshop for a long time, and I'm still exploring. I'm still thinking about new ways to try to get stuff done. And I hope that anybody that's ever going to be taking my advice will be as quick to forget my advice as I am and start exploring for themselves. Normally I like to do the whole body, but since Kirdan carries a shield, I didn't feel like drawing that other hand. I knew that it had to be in front of him slightly because of his body language feeling closed in. As long as one of them was showing, that was important to me. Early on in the video you see I do a quick little drawing of a dynamic running sketch. I didn't go with that one because I didn't think that it suited the character after reading about him for a bit more. And another reason is that I think it would be really cool to, as this progresses over the next year or so, every time there's a new character getting added to a big lineup, so it just becomes this one huge D&D character army. So I think, like, as long as I'm expressing the character, it doesn't have to be an action pose, but you know, if the character personality would demand that, if I sort of read that into the character, it's going to happen. But it's another reason to sort of keep things a little bit grounded, more down to earth. I think it's also more versatile, because once you have a character in a much more specific pose, like an action pose, there's not very many places that you can put them or implement them or whatever. And I want people to be able to take their character drawings and use them as in whatever way they want. They can sell them. I don't care. It's their property as far as I'm concerned. So with the skin tone that I chose, I I went with just the pale underlying skin. I was figuring because of his indoor reclusive, book-ridden nature, he would be mostly pale, and he's going off on adventures, so he'd be having that affect his skin in some way, and so by having some skin be still pale, it would help if it ever needed to be shown, like if a shirt was open or something, which will eventually happen. There might be some room for some skin tone variation on the one character. One thing I forgot to go over was this white frame that I do pretty consistently on my characters. I do this just purely for practical reasons. The reason why is because when I put the white frame around the character, I don't need to worry about keeping the border of the character clean, so I don't have to. I think that I'm just a bit worried that it'll add more work to the whole process if I constantly have to be nervous or keep cleaning or be nervous around or keep cleaning up the edges around the figure that I'm working on. So if I just cover the whole thing up with white once I got the silhouette figured out, it's not going to be a problem. In this case, I just did that over the figure, and with the fabric over top. That's something that I'm pretty flexible with. Now, the outfit that I've got going on here, with the way that he's wearing his collar, I'm thinking of, man, this is going really fast, really hard to keep track of. Anyway, so starting from the top to bottom, his collar is, well, his clothing is all standard, or like standard issue. It was given to him by the Order of the Clerics of Ogma. So his collar is, if it was done up, as it was likely the case when he left the temple, it would have been uptight, scholarly, close to his neck, high up. Now, as he's been going out into the world and exploring and finding himself and getting into trouble and adventures, his shirt is opening up, even just for practical reasons. It's hot, it's muggy, he's going to tropical places, hot places, he's walking for 10 hours a day carrying books and scrolls and shields and breastplates and big jackets, and but it also kind of helps go with just that explorer look, just sort of like a more exaggerated Indiana Jones shirt collar. The pants are just inspired by just baggy sort of Buddhist monk pants. There's something that I try to do with this whole character is trying to implement little slightly familiar, symbolic, or representational things of certain religious orders in real life to help try to increase or remind people of that, sort of place it in a setting of that type. For the shoes at the bottom there, I did give them that point. I'm sort of basing them off some boots that I got myself recently, and they have something called a moccasin toe or a mock toe, and it's sort of like this largely vertical strip of leather that goes around, and it sort of makes like a very squarish profile of the boot. And I thought of combining that sort of leatherwork shape with a sort of a stereotypical elven pointed toe to sort of call back to that elven history of his, but also then cramming that all together with the shape of like a medieval European wooden clog. I thought that might be a good way to design a shoe for this guy. Breastplate is very standard, very non-flashy. Kirdan is described as he's working and living as a scribe with the Clerics of Ogma in the library where he mostly was being a scribe and all. He started exploring texts revolving warrior wizards and adventures and demons and powerful spells and stuff that was maybe a little bit off the record for him. He probably shouldn't have been getting into it. It started to inflame a passion or like an interest in adventure and a desire to go and explore and discover new things and find himself and have adventures and parties and get into trouble and have some action scenes in his life. So as he left, I'd imagine starting off quite poor. Any sort of breastplate that he would take with him would either be purchased or found very early, whether it's discarded or found in a blacksmith shop for a low price, or if it was something just lying around at the temple itself. They don't wear armor themselves, they're magic users. They sort of think it's a bit silly and weird and out of place for a wizard to have magic, but for him he just feels so secure with it. So I figure whatever sort of metal and armor that he's going to be wearing is going to be something that's not flashy, very practical, Not necessarily in terrible shape, like it wasn't left in a barn, but it hasn't been polished. It's not very flashy, and it's just super practical. Now his glove there, the part that's covering the back of the hand is based on a Shinto monk like sleeve. It has this big sort of lily pad shape that flashes over, or that reaches over the back of the hand like that. And then for the pinky part, I was inspired by one of my students. He has one of those Wacom Cintiq friction gloves that go on the ring finger and the pinky finger. It's like a black spandex sort of glove. I think it's just to aid with friction and stuff, but I thought that would be some sort of cool ink stop guard, hand protector from ink for a scribe-like character. So I combined those two things and threw them on. I also gave him sleeves like a 19th century printmaker with the black band rolled up sleeves and all that. It's similar to like a barkeep. As far as the shield goes, my main idea behind it was rather than giving him just like a big war shield, I'd imagine he'd want something flat and like a surface, something that he could turn around and use as a table. So I thought, why not take a table or a shield and give it little things that make it look like a bit more of a writing desk. Like there's a little divot for an inkwell, there's a long sort of trough for laying down pencils or styluses or whatever, little holes on the side for putting a quill pen down into, too, if need be, and then a little tray at the bottom for keeping paper from sliding down. I also carved in the two bottom corners so that it could fit between his thighs. It was inspired by something I believe was called a scriptorium, which is like a more portable writing table that monks in medieval Europe used when transcribing Bibles and such like that. And I thought that would just be a nice way for him to not need to carry a steel shield and also a scriptorium and also books and everything. For this jacket, I wanted to give him a big duster, something that would just keep him safe from the elements. But rather than make it just a flat open thing, I decided to give it a little bit another piece of religious symbolism. This is based on like a Gothic architecture, a Gothic cathedral door frame, window frame, where it has those like almost scalloped sort of arches coming in towards the center. Big baggy monkish pants. Drawstring waist, practical. A big part of his mission that he's on is he's going around collecting scrolls and bits of writing and knowledge for the Brotherhood to take out. So he's going to have a lot of scrolls. The big scroll on his back was inspired by those like plastic tubes that architects carry the blueprints in and walk around with. I see art students carry them sometimes. Very practical. So here's sort of another thing, like with looking up a lot of Buddhist and Shinto monks, a lot of them I see wearing sandals. So I wanted to give him some sandals too. Very practical, very modest and humble. Just made out of strips of leather, maybe old belts. It's a pencil case. Could be pencils or gum or something for doing layouts and bones for folding. And this part here is a vial of ink on his forehead. It's a callback to another sort of bit of religious imagery. I believe it's called a phylactery. It's what the Jewish people at the Wailing Walls wear on their foreheads. It's like a little black box. I'm not sure exactly what's in there, but I thought having something related to being a scribe, being a learner, being a book copier and all that, having that represented very, very openly and boldly on his forehead, on his face, right by his eyes, it sort of gives he's not ashamed. He is sort of described as something of being a bit of a missionary, bringing the word of Agma out into the world, but also it's just that sort of place of prominence and importance. It sort of lends itself to a sacredness of the quality of the ink. He really is intentional about what words he's putting down and how important it is that he's even putting any words down. So technique-wise here, painting technically, it's always a good idea to start off with some sort of overall undercolor. In this case, I'm just going with kind of just a warm, creamy yellow. It's really up to you. Depends on your own sense of taste and sense of what you think would be a good match for what's sort of going on in your brain. You can have a cool base, a warm base, red base. Like I'm always a fan of like landscape paintings that have like a really bright red, like carmine red underpainting. And even if like the landscape is like a cold wintry mountain, and there's all these little bits of red popping out intentionally, it's just such a nice look. But either way, starting off with a white background, it can really make your colors look quite cheap and hesitantly put down. If you have something that goes underneath, whenever there's a space or a thinning of your color, it looks much more intentional, and it also helps homogenize your color scheme a little bit. Not homogenize, but it ties it together. It helps make it look like it's sort of existing in the one place. Here's me doing that frame thing again. In the future, I think I'll probably just wait to do the frame after I've got the costume down. Like a little wood cap where the handle of the big script goes out, and then also the feather, the quill attached to his armor right out in the open, easy to grab, immediate, in a place that won't easily crumple. You might have noticed I tried to put it behind his ear, but it was just a bit too flamboyant or flashy. This guy needs to be a bit more modest and humble, more practical. I was figuring something like a pocket protector, but since he's got the breastplate on, it should be affixed to the breastplate. So again, just general tones. One thing I'm starting to learn as I get into more rendery, sort of painterly stuff is that it's really good to start off with a medium to medium dark sort of tone. I find that if I start off far too dark, then the edges of things start to look a bit too cartoony, and it's sort of hard to go back and lighten them up without leaving, lightening up that sort of area without making the edge seem more and more like a really harsh line. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be playing around with a lot as we move forward with these, is going about different ways of being painterly or not. Seeing what sort of order of events it goes, or what sort of path it takes, it's going to be pretty neat. At this point, before I change the shield, one thing I also kind of like is all the ink marks. There's like a part where, there's the ink leaving the ink well where he's dipped it in and pulled his pen across down to the bottom right. There's the ink around the edges of where paper has been pinned down, and you can sort of see the square silhouette of a sheet of parchment blocking out the ink that has been spilled on it many times. Maybe he's been bumped in a wagon. Maybe he's been working on a wagon that went over a pothole. Maybe he got bumped in a city street. I wanted it to just show that he has been working. He's been doing this thing. He's sincere. So now I've started rendering, pushing back the line art. I like to keep things a bit more painterly, but starting off with line art's good. I find it most helpful to start off with the darkest and the next darkest shadows, places where you know that the shadow is absolutely going to be. It can help work as a grounding. If you know where the darkest shadows are going to be and how dark they're going to be, it can help contrast that with where everything else is going to be. Everything else is going to be going in relation to that, as far as how dark the shadows need to get. I just like getting that stuff out of the way so that you don't overdo the rest. Got a bedroll back there in case you're wondering what that was. So yeah, just more shading, just more shadows. In this case, I don't usually like to shade with black ever, outside of very certain circumstances. The only time I shade with just pure black is if I'm not being very creative or I'm lazy, which happens a lot, or for a serious answer is if it's something in a very diffuse gray overcast lighting, something like English countryside, things will usually have a very gray plain shadow, or something in like a really dark sort of circumstance. But I won't get to a black shadow without first going through the spectrum, depending on what the light's going to be. Like if it's like a moonlit scenario, the shadows of things would start off going into the blue range and then into black. If it's in a torchlit dungeon, it would be something that would go from an orange to a reddish to a black first, but never just straight into black. It's always important to have some hint of color. Like if you're going to be lowering when you do the color picker, or bring up the color picker, you're going to want to move it down towards black, but also towards another color in the hue selection area. Things like even this sunburn on his face, it's something that I wanted to show him being sort of touristy, in the sense that he's a new traveler. He's not out much. This is sort of his fresh adventure out on his own. He hasn't had time to work out up a tan. You can sort of see the naked, the very pale skin around the inside of his shirt, where it's getting lobster red. He'll get there eventually, but I think it's something to make sure that you think about, like stuff like that. I think it helps make him seem fresh-faced, young, naive, new, kind of dweeby, but he'll get there. He's eager. In this case as well, Kirdan is described as being around 110, 115 years old, which is just leaving adolescence. So he's sort of the equivalent of like someone in their early 20s, as far as human years go. One thing I try to do is just like a quick fix for depicting ages. Like basically, the younger somebody gets, the bigger their head gets in proportion to their body. So his head is slightly larger than I would for like an older, wiser, more sagely or austere kind of high elf, and his eyes are also a little bit larger and wider. If I was to do an older high elf, I think he'd be a lot more relaxed, especially the upper eyelid. So here's some even more dark shadows. Brown as well. They're not black. I will use black shadows eventually on most things, but those are sort of like where the light's being the most occluded, in the deepest recesses where there's just like almost like just the tiniest amount of like photons bouncing around. But I'm also still just figuring out my whole process. So I'm basically just putting stuff in as I notice it. There's some black. But even still, if I do use a black shadow, I use it very subtly. I try not to use it so much that the blackness shows up, even though it is a bit dull, but it would still be dull. But I did just quickly go over it with the flesh tone again to inject some color back on top. Now I normally do. Oh yeah, I should notice. You might have noticed too is there's been a few instances where I duplicate the image and resave it starting from there. As I'm doing this, I'm just used to growing up my whole life on slow, chuggy computers, especially as they get more and more layers. Like I usually try to max out at 10 layers, but especially since my computer has been having some fits lately, I've basically just been doing all these layers, getting to a point where I know that I'm not going to be needing to adjust those layers, or at least I feel confident about that. And then I'll duplicate it and then merge all those layers in that new image, and just use that as as a basis. So that way the image file stays small that I'm working on, and it's a bit easier on the system. I did that about 4 times with this one, just being a bit paranoid. I don't think I needed to do it. The computer I'm running has 8 gigabytes of RAM. Which is really, it's the best art computer that I've owned personally. I really enjoy it. I think that's like all you'd need, but I've also got to get a new hard drive. I've got like a gigabyte left on my hard drive space, and that's stressing me out, but we'll get there. But yeah, that's why I've been duplicating stuff. And you might notice on the right, if you even care, that sometimes layer chunks and groups are just completely gone. So here's some more shadows and rendering. I do a lot of stuff out of order. I think a big part of that is that I haven't really nailed down my exact procedure yet. I haven't gotten that nice pipeline, but slowly building up here and there. I really like to sample from colors once I lay things down. That's another good reason to do the underpainting with the warm color or the cool color, whatever you choose, and then doing the big sort of local color swaths on top and getting into the shadows. Because once you don't need to keep picking brand new colors every time. A huge part of all this stuff is just taken from existing places. The deeper the shadows get, the more away from any sort of reflected light or the sunlight or anything. The more open I am about using black, because there's literally less photons there. Anytime there's a shadow with the color, that color is coming from somewhere. Especially now that it's winter, some of you might have noticed some snow where you live, and there's you'll notice that the shadow, in case you don't know, there's the shadow on all the snow is blue, and that's just because the place that on the snow that isn't getting hit with sunlight is getting hit with light that's shooting out from the atmosphere from every other angle. So that happens all the time on almost everything, and that's one of the reasons why I don't like to just use plain black, is because even if it's something where you can't see the sun or you can't see the sky or well, I mean, you could probably see the sun, but light's going to be bouncing in from every angle except in very specific circumstances, and that's why I always try to add a color to the shadow. So Kirdan is described as a nice, soft-spoken guy with a shy demeanor. His favorite place in the world would be inside with a nice book. As of late, though, he's found that action and adventure are quite thrilling, and he's a bit concerned that he's enjoying it a bit too much. Now, as I go, I do work out the face quite a bit. I mean, not that much yet, but I did sort of want to give him that kind of wide-eyed, bright and bushy-tailed look. Not like a confident, smug, heroic look, not a cowardly look, but just something that's a bit like a deer in the headlights slightly. Like maybe he doesn't know exactly what he's gotten himself into, whether he's afraid of his adventures or afraid of how it's going to affect him or what he's going to become. I guess that's up to Wandering Hunter as he plays through with this character. Fabric is my least favorite thing to do. It's something, though, that I know I should practice more in. I did have some photo reference of sort of like those ninja parachute pants, but it was sort of low res. But it did help quite a lot, especially just getting like those main folds just above the knees and sort of up in the crotch. But I find that as long as you just sort of keep working at it, don't get too married to it. Be ready to just paint over something just to get it right. It's worth it. I'm not saying that I got it right, but I think it turned out better. It got better as I worked on it. But that's something that is always worth doing, is getting just some nice fabric reference. Even if you have to take a picture of something similar of yourself with your cell phone, that would help a lot. You can, even just for speed, like the picture is always going to look better if you are basing it on something real. But it also just helps make things faster. And the more you use reference, the less you'll need reference, and the less you'll need to rely on it. Like, you should always use reference anytime that you can or it's convenient. It will always inform your drawing better than your pure imagination can. But as you go, you'll be able to feel much more confident and I think be much more effective at taking liberties with it. Just wanted to have him notice the blonde eyebrows were a little bit too hard to see from a distance. And since the winner of the lottery is the only recipient of the full res version, and everybody else is going to have to see a small version, I felt I did have to increase the size of them just a little bit to make them a bit more visible. But I also think it helped kind of make them look a little bit more determined. So this is just like it's just like got like a wood plug with a hole through it and a leather strap with some sort of snap or peg that holds it on. Rolled up stitched piece of leather. Some sort of fancier, heftier scroll inside, so that's why the handle of it is a bit more ornate. I don't know whether there's a whole bunch of scrolls rolled up in there or one really big fancy one, but there's definitely going to be getting a range of scrolls from places, from different cultures, from different classes, from different for different purposes, and the scrolls are going to have. If I had time, I would have loved to just describe or to design like 10 scrolls, each one representing a different sort of country he's been to and wandered to. Even though like the default is exactly like the ones I'm drawing right now, where it's just the rolled up piece of brownish, coffee stained rolled up fabric with the triangles cut in the corners. But there's so much variety, even in just human history, of different styles and ways to fill out or even produce these things, like different materials and colors and styles and all that stuff. Something that's been great about being a concept artist is how much research you have to do for everything. That's one of the more fun parts, is just reading books, going to the library, watching documentaries, just trying to find out stuff on every new project so that you can just make some neat decisions on how things go. But the thing that I like a lot about that is that it's sort of shown me that nothing is boring in this world. As long as you get into it enough, as long as you give it enough time, everything becomes extremely fascinating. I think it's like a familiarity thing. The more time you spend with something, even if it seems dull or uninteresting, the more you spend with it, the more versions of it you see, the more ways it can go that you get exposed to. The example I always use is one of my closest friends was he grew up and was born and raised on a cow farm in Saskatchewan, and his stories out of all of us friends are the best stories. They're the most interesting, even though he's from like one of the most stereotypically boring sort of scenarios that you could imagine. It's just a cow farm in Saskatchewan, which is basically the Canadian version of Kansas, but with more mosquitoes and more snow. But his stories and his past and are just the most interesting. They're the most funny, and I think it's because he was exposed to just to less things but more intimately. So he's got all these crazy stories about cows and wildlife and farm life, of things happening that you'd never guess. I won't give any of them away, but it's just something that happens. Well, here's at least some little bit of variety. I thought it'd be cool to have maybe like a reddish paper, just something to help imply that these scrolls are coming from different lands, different countries, different cultures, different classes, different materials. Even that being sort of a poor man's illuminated text. There's no gold. There's just and then different like script fonts and things like that. So the white shirt underneath just being something very formal, very standard issue. Some straps going back and around, holding up some kind of travel gear. Sort of picturing this guy being a little bit like one of those people that backpacks across Europe. I was gonna give him a big lumpy backpack, but I didn't want to overdo it. And I think that it's more important in this case to show him as a bit of more of a wanderer or an adventurer rather than a tourist. I don't want to overdo that part because he does get into fights, and he's actually kind of pretty good at it. It says in the description that he just loves the look on people's faces, on like bandits and monsters' faces, when the weak little scribe is able to hold his own beside a barbarian in a fight. I think that's a really cool sort of contrast. In a way, it's something. He's something almost similar to like a larval Indiana Jones, an Indiana Jones that grew up with no grit, though. In the third Indiana Jones movie, he's already got some sweet attitude when he was young, but I'd imagine this guy just like leaving the nest at about 22, sort of college age guy without that early experience, but he's gonna get there eventually. This guy's he's gonna be able to teach people a thing or two when he's done. Some things on the hands, just some rendering and detail. Even like here, I think I might have done that outside border a little bit too dark. Posture-wise, he's just resting his fingers gently on it. Sort of like a security blanket for him. I was also thinking as far as like fingernails and stuff go, he's a scribe. He's probably got a lot of good habits, but he's also neat and clean and tidy, so he's got some nicely groomed fingernails still. A big part of the process is just this little back and forth thing, color sampling, just blending stuff together, making sure materials are rating folds and things. My favorite part is just the sketching and the coming up with an idea. Oh, yeah, this is just a little piece of string for fastening his shirt up around his wrist tightly, just a cinch rope. Yeah, it's there's some sort of this is some sort of principle where it's like the further you get towards the end of a piece, the longer each sort of step takes. It's like the progress goes along very quickly as you start, but as the longer you go, the longer it's taking to get to the finish line. So the more detail, the more rendering, the more cleanup, the more other rendering and detail. I'd be curious if I even took these videos and sort of just took sort of some data and noted when I started filling in the flat colors or started the rendering process, at what point in the timeline it would be. Like if this was an hour, like how many like how close to under 10 minutes is it going to be before I get to the color stage? The sketching goes by very quickly comparatively. He's got ink smudges on his sleeve there, so his hand guard is working. I did have some tan lines on the underside of his breeches there, but I decided to just forego it. I thought that once I started adding the shadow, it might just continue to look kind of confusing. So in the case of Kirdan, the only physical description that I got of him was that he has a breastplate, he has a steel shield, he's a high elf, he's young, he's 115 years old, and he has short blonde hair. Everything else about him just came out of what he is, what he does, what he hopes for, where he's from, where he's going, what his personality is. All of that just informs the design. The more you know a character, the more you can design a character. Like I said in the Ratman video, designing a character is like reverse engineering one of those Sherlock Holmes like diagnosis scenes where he comes in and he looks somebody up and down and he sees like the dog hair on the pant leg, so he knows that this person has a dog or you know, some sort of weird detail. There's one I was like where it was like I think it was like Matt Frewer was playing him, but you like noticed that this guy had a pocket watch that was used to have some engraved thing on the cover but was worn smooth, and he deduced that he was nervous all the time because he was constantly taking it out and fidgeting with his watch and stuff like that. So basically what you're really trying to do is fill a character with as many details that somebody can pick up on and relate to and interpret in a way that, whether it's accurate or not, doesn't matter. They need to feel that it's accurate. They need to feel like they can look at somebody and kind of get an idea of what this person's about, where it's going to go. And you can totally go against that too. You can totally play with people's expectations, but the thing with character design is that when you break the rules, you're actually just following the rules really well. An example would be, I can't remember the name, but the main villain from the movie Misery, Kathy Bates. She's this psychopathic, just horrible woman who enslaves her favorite author, breaks his legs, keeps him bedridden, but she's just this big, friendly looking cat lady with the sweater and like the tea, and just this total like contrast between her physical appearance and her inward appearance, and that is like excellent character design. It's that disparity that helps make her seem so much more horrible and menacing. Another perfect example would be Men in Black, of like breaking the rules of that sort of method of character design is using them excellently. Just like you've got intergalactic space cops or interplanetary space cops that know every secret and conspiracy and operate on this immense level that no one would ever think possible. And it's just guys in suits. It's plain black suits, as plain as possible. This golden rope in the middle here, it's just something where it starts in the middle, up near the top, and that notch on the top corner is where it goes around to the back. And it's basically so he'd be sitting on a bench and he'd have that thing in the middle between his thighs, and that rope would come around and he would just be holding it out at an angle. So, the scriptorium, the monk that I saw using, had a leg that went out the back, but I thought that would conflict with the handle of a shield. So I thought another way to have him just hold on to it. At something that's a bit more adjustable. If he had like hardware bolted on that's just more weight, like for a handle, if it had a hole carved in the side, that would make it a less effective shield. And this is a good way for him to just have something light, but he can use as a handle. And a handle anywhere. It's not affixed to one side, it's not affixed to the top. He can just, it's a lot more ergonomic. I also thought that a young, brittle-bodied man going on an adventure, I think that a big steel shield would be much too heavy and tiresome for him to carry practically. He'd want to get rid of it eventually. So I had the section hollowed out and replaced with wood as a means of lightening it. Normally I would fill it with a bunch of boards like a typical Viking shield, but I thought that it might be better with like a wider plank, like something from a coffee table, or I mean not a coffee table back then, but so that's why I didn't put any big board separations between it. It took a lot of fighting to fight that impulse, but so one big solid piece of wood, something you can still use as a writing surface, but just works more practically as a shield. And I think the other way originally too, I just felt it was too boring. Even though I thought the concept was sort of fun, it just needs to be executed a bit more interesting. Even like the wasting and the variation of the shape now, sort of inspired by music stands, like traditional music stands that you see like violinists have. The part there that goes between his thighs at the bottom, it's hollow because just for saving weight, and it's got a rounded edge so it doesn't pinch any skin like of his thigh against a table or something. That'd be really painful. Also got nips and chunks taken out where he's blocked swords coming down and from the side. All this sort of wear and tear is really important, especially with fantasy characters or any sort of action character, whether it's sci-fi or not. Showing signs of their history at every chance. Things like this here is like arrow wounds and a spear wound, and then right away I start adding some fire damage from maybe like a pyromancer of some kind. But even those chinks in his shield, like the one towards the inside of his body, on that edge, there's more indents on that side than on the outside. I think because of his handedness and how he'd be holding the shield, I just think that's where he'd probably be deflecting more blows and using his shield more, so there's going to be more sort of pieces hanging out on there. I painted over this logo, this emblem of Ogma. It's a scroll. He's got a scroll symbol. There is sort of a canon, there is a canon emblem, but I didn't want to go along with it. It looks like something somebody drew in the 2000s or the 90s. It's just very contemporary, very normal, very I mean, it's not a bad design, but it's just, it doesn't look like something someone from a medieval fantasy context would draw. And I also thought it would be cool to have, so he's got excuse me, he's got two symbols. He's got one on his shield and one on his breastplate. And I wanted to have a disparity or a difference in cultures there. Different cultures sort of represented. I'd imagine the Order of Ogma has elves and dwarves and men. So this might have been like some sort of shield from one race from some other century, and the emblem painted on his shield would have been made even by him before he left. Even when I applied this white color here, I wanted it to look sort of blobby and dauby, like something that was put on with a brush, so I didn't get too rendery or opaque with it. Oh dang, and a chunk was missing where I added all the radiosity, or all that blue lighting, and I signed it, and I hope that helped out a bit. Thanks for watching, guys. Tune in next week and every week. Every Monday I have a free character art lottery where I will draw your role-playing characters, your fantasy role-playing characters preferably, to a professional level for totally free. All you gotta do is just follow me on Twitter, and I'll give you the updates on what to do next. I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for your comments. Let me know if this format works, and or if you have any input or anything. I'm I'm still learning how to do all this stuff. So thanks a lot, guys.